Realizing something is wrong. Throughout my life, I'd been fed the notion that I had the capability to do anything I wanted, to achieve my dreams and change the world. The slogan for Boston University's College of Engineering even used to be, "We change the way the world works." What I came to find, however, was that the system I was living within was not designed to help me change the world. It was designed to lead me to get a job working towards someone else's vision of what the world should be. They could have changed their slogan to, "We work for people who change the way the world works." This is not to take away from people who get jobs working for other people. I'm not trying to put them down. I'm trying to emphasize the simple reality that if someone else hasn't created the organization which is doing the work you believe in, then you will be stuck working on something you don't necessarily believe in. You may even end up working on something that is not compatible with your values, ethics, or desired lifestyle. We all know plenty of really good people who do work they are not proud of because they need to feed themselves and/or to feed their families. The only way out of this trap is to create your own opportunities, and students are never taught the skills and knowledge of how to do this. School generally teaches you how to follow orders, not take initiative. Alfie Kohn wrote extensively about the problems with school micromanaging the day-to-day events in children's lives in his book, Punished by Rewards: The Trouble with Gold Stars, Incentive Plans, A's, Praise, and Other Bribes. What rewards and punishments do is induce compliance, and this they do very well indeed. If your objective is to get people to obey an order, to show up on time, and do what they're told, then bribing or threatening them may be sensible strategies. But if your objective is to get long-term quality in the workplace, to help students become careful thinkers and self-directed learners, or to support children in developing good values, then rewards, like punishments, are absolutely useless. In fact, as we are beginning to see, they are worse than useless. They are actually counterproductive. Reference 4. While you may feel this resonates with your experience in school today, Alfie Kohn wrote that in 1993, over 25 years ago. This problem is not a new one. As far back as 1970, journalist and author Charles Silberman wrote, "Far from helping students to develop into mature, self-reliant, self-motivated individuals, schools seem to do everything they can to keep youngsters in a state of chronic, almost infantile dependency. The pervasive atmosphere of distrust, together with rules covering the most minute aspects of existence, teach students every day that they are not people of worth and certainly not individuals capable of regulating their own behavior." Reference 5. Tragically, it appears that the use of control to restrict young people's self-direction is not an accident. It is deliberate. For example, I learned that the original goal of the U.S. education system was to create laborers to feed an industrial machine. John Rockefeller, America's first billionaire and the richest man who ever lived, organized the General Board of Education to help fund the launch of America's public high schools. Their vision for education is clear from the board's mission statement in 1906. "In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We hope not to raise up from among them authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen of whom we have ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. We will organize children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way." Reference 6. While this sounds like they aimed to make a nation of robots, which feels pretty evil, that doesn't necessarily mean the founders of our education system were supervillains hatching an evil scheme to control the population. It could just as well mean that they genuinely believed this was the path to American prosperity and that it would benefit all mankind. I'm not looking to crucify any historical figures. I'm bringing this quote up to explain how we got to the way things are today. It's easy to look at the way the world is today and feel that it's always been like that. It may feel like school is a staple of American history. It is not. It may feel like school is a staple of human history. It is not. Mass schooling is a recent invention. My particular concern is with the idea of compulsory schooling, where young people are forced to attend. Researcher and self-directed learning advocate Carrie McDonald writes that just over 2 decades after the Pilgrims' arrival, Massachusetts Bay Colony legislators passed the colony's first compulsory education statute. The General School Law of 1642 required families to ensure the good education of their children. 5 years later, in 1647, Massachusetts Bay passed its second compulsory education law, which required that towns with more than 50 or more families hire a teacher, and towns with 100 or more families open and operate a grammar school. These schools were not compulsory in the sense that schooling is today. Rather, it was the town that was compelled by the state to offer such a school for families who wanted to use it. Towns, not parents or students, were punished for not complying. Reference 7. Initially, school was offered in much the same way that a public library is. It was a community service which was offered to the public, which people could choose to use or not to use. It was not forced upon children against their will. 200 years later, the first compulsory education law in the United States that mandated children attend school was ratified in Massachusetts in 1852. By 1918, Mississippi became the final state to adopt compulsory education laws. Reference 8. In modern times, it is often a fight for parents to get their kids to go to school. At the time these laws were passed, many families resisted the idea of the government using force to separate them from their children. As former teacher turned self-directed learning advocate John Taylor Gatto shared with the New York State Senate during his acceptance speech for the award of New York City Teacher of the Year in 1990. Compulsory schooling was resisted, sometimes with guns, by an estimated 80% of the Massachusetts population. The last outpost in Barnstable on Cape Cod not surrendering its children until the 1880s, when the area was seized by militia and children marched to school under guard. Reference 9. Gatto famously quit teaching after receiving his third New York City Teacher of the Year award and his first New York State Teacher of the Year award by writing a Wall Street Journal article that closed with the line, "If you hear of a job where I don't have to hurt kids to make a living, let me know." Reference 10. While the laws demonstrating the adoption of the compulsory aspect of schooling are clear and easy to trace, the history of how our factory schooling model came to be is more difficult to track. There's no doubt that it has historical context, but my research has led me to many unverified stories which lack primary sources. The most detailed account of this history comes from Gatto, whose work is featured at johntaylorgatto.com. Reference 11. Without rewriting his entire body of work here, the story seems to be that the factory-style school comes from the Prussian model of education that became popular in Western civilization in the late 1800s and early 1900s. This model includes familiar features such as separating children by age and grade, changing classes throughout the day with the ringing of a bell, grading and tracking student performance, compulsory attendance, specific training programs for teachers, national testing standards, dress codes and school uniforms, and a prescribed national curriculum for each grade. The ultimate goal is believed to be instilling obedience and uniformity into all students. This goal was desirable for employers who wanted laborers that would be on time, work long hours, follow directions, not challenge authority, and could read and write, as well as by politicians and national leaders who wanted to indoctrinate youth with patriotism, instill a universal moral code, and be knowledgeable enough to vote wisely in public democratic elections. If you browse John Taylor Gatto's work or search the web for the Prussian model of education or the name Horace Mann, you will come across these stories that make up our school system's history, which will make you feel uncomfortable and possibly even angry. That's not my purpose here. Instead, I'm trying to emphasize that there is a history and inertia that explain how we got to where we are today. As evolutionary psychologist and president of the Alliance for Self-Directed Education, Dr. Peter Gray writes, "If we want to understand why standard schools are what they are, we have to abandon the idea that they are products of logical necessity or scientific insight. They are, instead, products of history. Schooling, as it exists today, only makes sense if we view it from a historical perspective." Reference 12. Taking this perspective was really eye-opening for me. I realized that school was not always here, and it's possible that school will one day go away. The only thing in life that is constant is change. Going back even further in time, Peter's research has studied how children have learned throughout human history. His research extends over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, going as far back as when humans lived as hunter-gatherers. Peter has found that throughout human history, children have learned best through self-directed learning. In his book, Free to Learn, he writes, "We have forgotten that children are designed by nature to learn through self-directed play and exploration. And so more and more, we deprive them of freedom to learn, subjecting them instead to the tedious and painfully slow learning methods devised by those who run the schools." Reference 13.